Welcome to the Money, Sex, Gen X podcast. My name is Eric McLeod. I am joined by my partner in podcasting, Scott Stewart, aka Big Stu.
Bo, 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 bo.
What's
You
up,
know
my
what it
brother?
is.
I'm so happy to be doing another season with you. Today, we are talking about, and I need to switch something here. We are talking about, are you code switching?
Oh,
Are you code switching? And this is something that Big Stu brought to my attention. We were just having a chat. And really, the topic of this, I think Stu was saying, is are you code switching at work? But we're
okay.
going to just talk about what code switching is in general. Now, Stu, you had asked me a question about myself when I was in corporate. Can you hit me back with that question?
Yeah, have you ever code switched? Have you ever switched up in corporate? Have you been allowed to be your authentic self in corporate, or do you switch up? Do you code switch in the corporate environment? Because you've worked in corporate in the past.
I certainly have for many years. And when you first asked me that question, my answer was emphatically no.
Yeah.
And you kind of challenged me a little bit. I felt like you were trying to say, you did switch up, but you don't seem like you want to admit it, kind of thing. And my
I actually went on full deep. I went full blitz on you,
okay,
and I was like, nah, you changed up your whole persona. You weren't even
wow,
yourself in corporate. I said, like, nah, you switched up because you made a comment how you and if let me get the words right, but
okay,
you'll do better. But my interpretation of the words were you were not being your full self. You suppressed your personality. And I
okay.
said, well, you were not being your authentic self. You switched up. You weren't being yourself in corporate. And you was like, nah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I love when people try to tell me what I've done when they weren't there. No, I'm just messing with you. It was a fair question, right? And so my response to you was, we both know someone specifically that used to work with the show that was there with me in corporate, and I said, hey, I want you to ask her with me right there, did I switch up in corporate? And what I said was, I don't believe she would say that I would switch up. I believe she might say that I was reserved. And I didn't, and I even said before that I don't think switching up is like reserving part of your personality. But you said it is. You're basically saying if you're not being 1,000% Eric at corporate or in the board meeting, you are code switching.
Yeah, I definitely talked about. So let me go back. So part of my history is, and hey, I love Ma Dukes to life. Love Ma Dukes to the fullest. But she was my first example of the code switch. And it started on, we had these things called, before cell phones, we had telephones in our house, and generally there was one in the kitchen and maybe the bedroom. Like maybe you had two, maybe one or two phones in your house. And she'd be sitting there smoking a cigarette, drinking a glass of wine, and we'd be having regular family time. And then when she went to phone rings and she goes to answer the phone and she switches,
Mhm.
hello, and it's just like, yo.
Right.
And we said, you put on your white voice.
Yeah.
It's like you got to do that sometimes. And I took that with me um, into college, but more importantly, I took it with me into corporate. You
Okay.
can't be you can't be your full self in corporate. You can't talk the way you normally talk, right? And today, how we see it play out, it's like you could be sitting in corporate in a meeting, and everything becomes like a question because you don't want to seem too offensive, and you want to seem a little bit more inclusive,
Yeah.
and your tone slows down and your
The
pitch
bass come out your
elevates.
voice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a code switch to me.
Okay. All
That's a code switch. And I gave the other example. I'm in, and something I've done. I'm in a board meeting, predominantly white, affluent board members, very small number of black folks on the board. And it's like, hey, how you doing? Hey, Jane Doe. Hey, John Doe. How are you? Has everything got a great weekend? And then I see E Money and I'm like, what up, bro? Peace. Peace, E. That's a code switch.
All
That's
right.
not being my authentic self. And you said, what did you say? Well, you wouldn't be like, peace, John Doe, peace, Jane Doe. And I said, in my authentic self, I absolutely would, because I'd be like, peace to everybody in the room. What up, yo? What up, everybody? We here. We about to make it happen. We're gonna have a good meeting, yo. Everybody good? But you can't do that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, so I might have been code switching because I'm gonna read the definition that I think ties more into what you're saying. But I guess how I looked at it was, am I keeping it real or not? And that might not be code switching per se, but my thing was, I'm not at work acting other than myself. I'm not changing my voice and all this stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm being who I am. But what I was saying was that when I was in corporate, I was very reserved and very much to myself. And I wouldn't bring the same energy to a dispute or a conversation that I would in my personal life. And your response was, well, that's code switching.
Yeah.
All right. So now I'm going to read the definition. And I'm doing this for the young, the old, anybody who's dealing with people. Let's figure out if we're code switching. Code switching involves adjusting one's style of speech, appearance, behavior, and expression in ways that will optimize the comfort of others in exchange for fair treatment, quality service, and employment opportunities. That is one of the definitions floating around on the internet. Oh, this is from hbr.org. Okay, cool.
Okay, hey, HBR.
That's their definition. Fine, fine. Now, what I said to you when we were talking a few minutes ago was, okay, that's cool. Now, I don't bring that same energy in my full personality, even to all Black people that I'm talking to. Is that code switching when it's your same race, ethnicity?
Well, I think that actually might be another topic, because I brought up the code switching in respect to the appeasement, or the effort to be non-threatening in corporate. And I didn't say this, but I insinuated, I assumed that it's received in the manner of being non-offensive to white folk.
Okay.
Corporate, like in corporate, because we're the minority. In order to get along, it's important that we code switch. You cannot be your authentic self in corporate. So when you talk about dealing with other people, like right now, some people may say, well, Stu, you code switching right now. You changed up your speech right now. Maybe I did code switch. Maybe I am code switching when I go to work among people who I work with predominantly, for the most part, I work with 98% Black people. And I might code switch how I articulate an idea or a thought or a contract or a proposal. Yes, absolutely. But I also feel like I'm still able to be my authentic self. One example is, I don't always feel the need to use the King's English when talking to Black folks. I feel like I can keep my Southside dialect and still be articulate when talking to some of my peers. But in those corporate spaces, those boardroom spaces where I'm the minority, I minimize much of that dialect. And to me, that's the loss of authenticity. That's a code switch.
The only part of this that I can't really get with is, and I appreciate you sharing your experiences, is that code switching is based on race. Because I feel like code switching happens, this is stay within Black people. So I'm sure you've had people that you were around, they were just a little more, like, I don't know what I want to use, like maybe they were a little more hood and you were a little more street, and you go around them and you just turn up your street volume just a little bit to blend,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or the inverse of that, you leave them and then you go to your homies in the suburbs and you turn it down and you talk a little bit more on a frequency that you feel like they can feel and they won't feel intimidated, or you want them to treat you fairly, right? You want to get opportunities. So I just feel like, or say you're talking to a Black person from another country, right? So you're not going to say certain things that you might say to E Money. You might not say it to them because you feel like you need to adjust your behavior and expressions to be received in a certain way. Am I right about this? Am I crazy? Is this happening? Is that code switching?
It is, and to some degree, I think you're right.
Okay.
I think you're right. Even I think about when I go into church, which is 99.999% Black. Uh, I don't speak the same.
Right.
But I do agree with that the code switching came about, particularly in higher ed sectors, institutions, and in corporate America. If you want to survive, if you want to keep your job, then you can't take your full self into those places, educationally, professionally. You got to switch up. And I'm saying today in 2023 that I'm advocating for the ability for us as a people, especially if we're being pro-Black, to figure out how you can be your full authentic self no matter where you are. You just need to figure out what that is. No, you don't want to be rude and disrespectful. I think there's a time and place for colorful language all the time. You know, I think there's a time and place to speak, more. What's the right word I'm looking for? I want to say not articulate, more, speak more properly with less dialect, less slang. I think those things are based on the environment, but I still want to be able to feel like I'm bringing my authentic self. If I don't agree with something, I don't want to have to meander over placing the right words to communicate that I disagree. I would love to be able to just say, you know what, I disagree, and people in my space don't take offense to that or take it personally or feel that I may have offended them in some manner. And I think that is the part that I'm really like this whole code switching thing. How do we get back to being just authentic without needing to fit into these various sectors, if you will, these various ecosystem environments?
Yeah. And that could be a lifelong endeavor. How to
Yeah.
be yourself. I remember years ago when I had my first child, I was married at another spouse at the time, but her brother was working at one of the largest advertising agencies in the world. I just entered corporate and I'm struggling because no one was there to teach me. I didn't know what a career coach and all this stuff. I just had to figure it out. So I asked him one day, I'm like, man, I'm having trouble. I'm coming to work and they're just not receiving me how I want to be received. I'm talking, they act like they don't understand what I'm saying. Back then, I had a heavy East Coast accent. I spoke like 2 times faster than I'm speaking now. People kept acting like they didn't understand. And you know what he told me, Stu? And this really helped me. He said, Eric, I'm in one of the largest advertising agencies in the world. And the best advice that I can give you is be yourself. He said, I'm from the south side of Chicago. I grew up in Inglewood. I don't change a goddamn thing when I go to work. I talk the same way, I act the same way. He said, guess what? They respect me for it. And the people that don't like it, they move away from you, right? And this goes back to marketing. I think about like Cameron and Mace have a sports show. Cameron is an example of a person to me that I believe is being his full authentic self at all times.
Yeah.
I saw him saying the N word with OJ Simpson. Like he doesn't care, right? And so it made me really understand that in marketing, they talk about attracting and repelling. So I'm going to say this to give advice to people if you're willing to accept it. This is something that I've learned. In marketing, they talked about when you put out something, if you've done a good job, you want it to attract and repel at the same time. You want to attract the people that are this is for, and you want to quickly repel the ones that it's not for. Saves you a lot of time and you get results faster. Maybe that's what we need to be trying to do in our regular life. Like you were saying, Stu, being yourself. Now, here's the part that I want to really lean into this nuance. Is turning yourself down the same as changing or adjusting? Like, are you not being yourself if you turn yourself down a little bit?
Initially, I'm going to say yes, but I want to preface that I didn't preface it at all. I want to back that up by saying turning yourself down, you know, there's a difference between turning yourself down and being humble, right? I think this is quite appropriate, first of all, to be humble. And then turning yourself down, maybe that means sometimes, and I'm talking, about myself and people who may be able to identify with me, because I have a big, strong personality. I command the space. My voice is sometimes intimidating. Turning yourself down means like falling back a little bit. Just be a little bit more reserved. Give space to others first, and be humble. I don't want you to turn yourself down, or anyone to turn themselves down where they feel like they're shrinking themselves or not being their full self. You can turn yourself down in humility and still be your full self. But if you're turning yourself down and you feeling uncomfortable or undervalued or overlooked or unappreciated, that's a different ball of wax. I don't think you should mute yourself or turn yourself down if it puts you in a position where you're being overlooked or you're not able to be comfortable in your skin. But I do think you should turn yourself down in a way that is all about humility and being humble.
That reminds me of something I looked up years ago, the word charisma. And the definition that I remember the most is the ability to make other people feel comfortable.
Yeah.
The ability to make other people feel comfortable. So to your point, I want to say this too, though. I feel like, I guess what my biggest takeaway from this conversation is, I believe we're code switching all day long, every day.
Yeah.
I'm code switching when I'm talking to you. You may be code switching when you're talking to me, just because like you and I get along pretty well. I would say we get along very well.
Yeah.
But I can tell there's way more to your personality, and you may be able to tell the same about me. But I am not going to bring all of that to our interactions. One, because it's not necessary, but two, am I going to be able to achieve my opportunities if I bring all of that? And I don't believe that that means I'm not being myself. It just means that I'm bringing the best part of myself for this interaction. Is that
Yeah.
code switching?
Yeah. So now you make me think about, abandoning this code switching and figure out how you can be more charming. I think there's a difference. Code switching to me just is an old ideology that means you need to change who you are in order to conform to your environment. I'm against that. No, be your authentic self, but be, by the definition that you gave, be charming, be humble, but be your full self as best as you can so that you're not off putting to others, so that you're not making a space uncomfortable for others. You should be able to still be yourself. And those who are attracted to it, great. And those who repel from it, great as well. There's one more point that I think to those who are parents of school age children. What I'm noticing when I enter into these buildings where a bunch of young people are learning, many young people are unable to be their authentic selves, and they are still being taught in a very in a very lost the word, but subtle manner, how to code switch. Because code switching to me, and this is only me, this is my idea of it. Code switching means I need you to act a certain way to conform to this space. That's a form of code switching. Students, young people, high school, middle school, primary, they are being forced to mute themselves in order to make the teacher, the class, the school leaders, or the school environment feel better, look better, at the expense of your child being able to be their full selves. And that's a problem.
Now, I'm going to disagree with you on that a little bit, just because I feel like there are times when we need to do that. You know, we in society, we have all this BS that we espouse to people about be yourself and show up as your full, and it's like, is your full self appropriate for every environment? Right? What if your full self is not that great of a person? What if your real authentic self is like you're an a-hole? You're like a person that a bully. Is that who we want to show up in these spaces? I think we have to really think about that. We have to really think about first who am I? And do I want that person to show up fully? And when we use the word, and this is just my opinions, I'm not trying to act like I'm some kind of philosopher, but I'm just saying, like, when we use the word code, I believe the code in that context is basically saying this is the accepted behavior for this environment. And maybe my full authentic self is not acceptable in this environment. Does that mean that I'm selling out or I'm not XYZ? Or does it just mean that I'm trying to develop the ability to be wise, swift, and changeable, where I can bring the part of myself that's beneficial to this particular interaction?
And I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it in that question. The idea is that what are we teaching our children about behavior in changing environments? No, you should not be a bad person that is rude and disrespectful. No, you should not talk over people. No, you should not be dismissive of other people's ideas. All of that that's like normal stuff. That's just asking a fish to swim. That's just asking a human to breathe. These things are unacceptable. You can be your authentic full self and yield the microphone. You can be your full authentic self and wait to express yourself, wait for your turn to talk without being like that. Doesn't mean you're not being your full authentic self, but you understand boundaries.
Okay.
You understand that there's a time and place for everything. There's a time and place to line up and go to your next class or pass through the hallway without being a jerk. Like, but I'll give you an example of what I mean. I'm teaching a stock market class and I'm showing a chart. And I assume that everybody understands how to read the chart. You read the chart from left to right. And I can clearly see that this chart has increased from left to right. So I say, hey, what do you see? Is this stock price gone up or down? And it has markedly gone up. And I have these couple of young people that say, It's going down. It's going down. It's going down. And then initially I got frustrated. So, in recognizing what we're talking about today, allowing young people to be their authentic selves, instead of berating them about, you don't see it my way, I asked this student to come up and show me how they are interpreting this chart. And then they said, well, from here to here, it's going down. I did not communicate to them which direction to read the chart. This particular student was reading it the opposite way. And when I corrected them, then they understood. But that came from my awareness of some students, right, see things differently. And if I will allow them to express themselves,
Yeah.
I'm creating a space for people to be comfortable being themselves in that particular learning environment. That doesn't happen often, not often enough. And that's an example.
Okay. I like that example. And I could actually visualize that as you were saying it. Now, here's the other side of that that I want us to dig into in the final part of this conversation. I would guess that most people are not being themselves just throughout most of their entire day. And I'll give you an example. We talked about charm.
Yeah.
So, like me, I can be very charming if I want to, but most of the time I choose not to be, right? But if I'm doing that, I'm actually not being my full authentic self in that moment. And some of the most charming people that I've met in my life were full of SI, right? So you know what I'm about to say. So full of it. But
Yeah.
they make you feel good and they, oh, you know, they're telling you all this stuff, right? But that's what we're taught to be. We're taught to be this version of ourselves that makes everybody feel good and that's acceptable and all of that. Me again, like when I walk into a room, I know it commands a lot of energy and attention. When I start talking, I know, and this is where I believe I've had to develop a different form of intelligence, emotional intelligence. I know that if I come at it with my full 100% intensity, I'm going to lose people.
Yeah.
Because they might be intimidated or for whatever reason, right? We always like to say people are intimidated by us, but maybe it's just not palatable the way that we're saying it. And that's where I think we have to develop emotional intelligence. And I feel like instead of telling people to be their full authentic self, we have to tell people, we should think about telling people to develop a broader sense of yourself. And I know I sound like a broken record, but the broader sense of yourself so that when you go into an environment, you're not switching up, you're just turning the chamber to another part of yourself. So, like your boardroom example, I think there's a way to go into a board meeting and kind of develop this part of yourself where, no, I don't talk to this person exactly how I would talk to E-Money, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close because I'm just tweaking a little bit for my audience. But like you said earlier, I'm not agreeing with things that I really disagree with. I'm not talking bad about people that I'm really for. I'm not being a traitor to those who I really respect and all of that. But again, I'm just shifting the chamber a little bit. And again, I want us to ask ourselves, what is my full authentic self? Because your full authentic self, you may not be a good person, maybe. Like you might be a bully. That might be, I've known people, their full authentic self is to bully somebody.
Yeah.
So again, is that who you want to bring to the board meeting? Maybe it is. Sometimes it's okay to pull that bully out if people are trying to bully you, right? But I'm asking, let's do the work of figuring out who am I really versus just telling people to show. I think showing up as your full authentic self off the rip could be very dangerous, especially if you haven't defined who that is and how that person is going to be received in different audiences.
Yeah, as we wrap this up, I want to speak, and I'll use this as kind of my final thoughts as well. I am thinking about when you're talking about your tribe, if you were to be your authentic self, you might definitely be talking to a very small niche group of people. And I want to say that although we live in a world full of numbers and metrics, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Because, and I'm not advocating for people being bad. Don't be a bad person. No, I'm not supporting people who you're just a bad person. No, that's not what we're talking about. I'm talking to our audience. I'm talking to our tribe of upperly mobile Gen Xers who are trying to, live a peaceful, healthy, and prosperous life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So in one respect, I am advocating for you as best as you most comfortably can to be happy with yourself wherever you go, because that's one thing that you cannot leave behind. You move to a new city, you want a fresh start, you have to take you with you. So be comfortable being yourself and in the fullness of you want that. And I'm also talking to people who are currently working jobs. Some of you are working some really, really high paying jobs and are unfulfilled in these positions. And one of the many reasons that I've heard from you is because you don't feel seen, you don't feel heard, you don't feel validated because you feel suppressed. And I am asserting that that suppression is coming from your inability to be confident in who you are. And so at work, you're not being yourself, and you just can't wait to get to a place where you can just be yourself. And I'd like for you to challenge yourself to figure out how you can be happy in all the places and spaces in which you occupy. Whether it's code switching or not, I leave it up to you to figure out how you get there.
Great take on this subject. I love it. Great take, and I really mean that. So I'm going to end by saying this quickly. I guess the conclusion I'm coming to is when we hear code switching, it's like, oh, I don't want to be a code switcher. I don't think it's necessarily anything wrong with code switching, because I think we're code switching all day long, as I've said before. I think the job is to figure out, how can I create different parts of myself that I can bring to different interactions. And that doesn't mean turning into somebody else. Again, it's bringing different parts of myself to different interactions. And that takes work, because I kind of feel like if you just got one self, that doesn't show much evolution or progression. I feel like, especially you and I, we're 50, like we should have different parts of ourselves at this point, my opinion, right? So try to figure that out, and don't automatically get defensive when someone says you're code switching. When Stu said that to me earlier, my reaction was to fight back. Really was no need. I could have just put him in touch with the person that I knew, and that could have solved it. But we've been programmed, when you hear code switching, I'm not a code switcher, I'm not a seller, like all this little stuff. So just, we don't have to, we can choose not to react negatively to those comments. Hey, this has been another great episode of the Money Sex Gen X podcast. We are rolling through this season. This is season 7. Follow us on all the major social media platforms. YouTube, we're streaming live right now. We're on IG, Facebook. We are also on all the major podcast streaming networks, including Apple Podcasts. Leave us a review. We've got people out there listening to the show in, I think, 57 countries right now. Something like that. It's a nice number. Leave us a review so we know you're out there, and share what you like about the show. Until the next episode, Stu. Peace.
Peace.